The frost came early to Edmonton that October, the kind that arrived without announcement and stayed without apology, coating every windshield on Garfield Avenue in a thin layer of white that nobody had time for on a Monday morning. On the 14th floor of Merritt and Hale Financial Group, where the carpet was thick enough to absorb sound, and the coffee was always fresh because someone had decided that good coffee kept people from noticing other problems. Only one person had been there since before the cleaners finished. Theo Barker stood at the window with a mop handle loosely in one hand and a half-eaten granola bar in the other, watching the city wake up below him the way someone watches weather they cannot change. His uniform was pressed. He had learned that much: pressed uniform, quiet movement, eyes that swept the floor and never lingered too long on anything that wasn't his to look at. He had learned to exist on the edge of other people's important days without disturbing them. His daughter had packed the granola bar herself that morning, tucking it into his jacket pocket before school while he was still tying his boots, and that small weight in his pocket had kept him company on the bus at 4:30 in the morning more than anything else had. Above him, through the sealed glass of the executive boardroom, voices were doing something that voices in that room rarely did. They were rising. Merritt and Hale had been a name in Edmonton financial consulting for 31 years. It had weathered interest rate shocks, the tail end of oil crashes, 2 internal leadership transitions, and a lawsuit that everyone in the industry remembered, but no one talked about in public. It had survived because it adapted, and because adapting, in the language of firms like this one, meant someone always absorbed the cost quietly enough that the clients never noticed. But the morning that Theo Barker arrived at 4:50 and began his circuit of the 14th floor, Merritt and Hale was no longer adapting. It was collapsing, slowly and precisely, in the way that institutions collapse when the people running them have spent too long believing the story they tell about themselves. Inside the boardroom, Catherine Merritt stood at the head of the long table where her father had once stood when the company was smaller, and she was still learning what she would one day inherit. The resemblance to him, people said, was mostly in the jaw, that particular kind of stillness that looked like patience but was actually will. She was 44 years old, unmarried, and had spent the last decade building something that the last 18 months had been quietly dismantling without her full understanding of how. Spread across the table in front of her were 3 sets of quarterly projections, a forensic audit summary, and a restructuring package prepared by the man sitting at her right. Philip Strand, Merritt and Hale's chief financial officer, who had been with the firm for 11 years and who had a habit of referring to disaster as a liquidity event, as though softer words made the impact smaller. The audit summary had been the thing that changed the morning. A creditor had demanded review. The review had surfaced numbers that didn't agree with each other, and those numbers had multiplied overnight like bad news always does, until by 6:15, Catherine was looking at a restructuring package that amounted, in plain English, to giving up. "Once we file," Philip said, voice even and practiced in the particular way that men who deliver bad news professionally learn to be even, "the creditors take the lead position. We have 48 hours before the covenant breach triggers automatic review." Nobody at the table answered immediately. The city outside was still dark at the edges. Someone had brought tea that nobody had touched. Theo had moved to the far end of the hallway by then, working the stretch of carpet near the boardroom with the quiet rhythm that 8 years of shift work teaches a person. He kept his eyes on the floor. That was the rule. Not a written rule, not something anyone had told him explicitly, but a rule understood in the way that invisible people always understand the rules about staying invisible. But the boardroom door was not fully sealed, and one sheet of paper, pushed by the movement of an assistant hurrying past with a tablet under her arm, slid from the edge of the side table near the door and landed half open on the hallway floor, close enough to Theo's cart that ignoring it would have required more deliberate effort than noticing it. He should have picked it up without reading it and placed it on the credenza by the door. That was what the rule said, the unwritten rule, the rule about staying invisible. He didn't. One number stopped him. Not the overall figure, not the headline loss. A single line in the amortization schedule, a recovery value treatment applied to a specific class of assets that carried with it an implication so wrong, so violently wrong to anyone who had spent 3 years in graduate school studying exactly this kind of model, that Theo's hand tightened around the mop handle before he was conscious of having a reaction. All inside, Catherine lowered her hand towards the restructuring package. The pen in her other hand touched the top edge of the first signature page. Theo Barker pushed open the boardroom door and said, "I'm sorry. I think there's a mistake on page 6. The first thing Theo noticed when every head in the boardroom turned toward him was that the silence had a texture. It wasn't the silence of surprise exactly. It was the silence of category violation, of a thing appearing where no logic had prepared anyone for it to appear. A maintenance worker in a gray uniform with a Merit and Hale Facilities badge and rubber-soled shoes that had left a faint mark on the carpet edge was standing inside a room that cost more per square foot than his monthly rent, holding a page that wasn't his to have read, making a claim that wasn't his to make. Philip Strand's reaction was the fastest. He had the kind of face that showed irritation before the thought finished forming, and what formed now was something past irritation. "This floor is restricted access during executive session," he said. "Who authorized?" "I'm the night maintenance lead," Theo said. He didn't step back. His heart was somewhere in his throat, but his feet stayed where they were. And he was not entirely sure why, except that the number on that page was still wrong. And a wrong number in a document like that, one, didn't become right because someone with a better suit told you to leave. The page came off the table. "I was putting it back." "Then put it back," Philip said. "The recovery rate on the capital lease pool," Theo said, "on page 6. It's treated as unrecovered. But if the Vancouver equipment disposition completed last March, those assets should have come off impairment. It changes the carrying value." The room held itself in that particular suspended way. Two people exchanged the kind of glance that is not quite a glance, more of a measurement. Catherine had not looked away from him. She had the pen still in her hand, and her eyes were the kind of still that meant she was not missing anything. "What's your name?" she said. "Theo Barker. How long have you worked here, Theo?" 4 years. Philip gave a short sound that landed somewhere between a laugh and a correction. "He cleans the floors, Catherine. I heard what he does," she said. And she did not look at Philip when she said it. She looked at Theo. "Come here." Philip's chair moved, a small, controlled shift. "We are 40 minutes from a creditor call." "Come here," Catherine said again to Theo. Theo walked to the table. He was aware of his shoes on the carpet, aware of the chemical smell of the cleaner on his sleeve, aware that the junior analyst in the corner had stopped pretending to type and was watching him with an expression that couldn't decide between alarm and something closer to curiosity. He set the page on the table and pointed. "This line, asset recovery treatment for the leased equipment in the Western Division. It's marked fully impaired. But the disposition notice for the Vancouver facility completed in fiscal Q1. I saw the internal notice in the recycle bin last spring. If that recovery posted, your impairment write-down is overstated." Philip leaned forward with his arms flat on the table. "Equipment disposition doesn't automatically reverse impairment. You'd need a formal reassessment." "Yes," Theo said. "And if that reassessment was done and the recovery was booked to the subsidiary ledger, but the consolidated model still carries the old impairment figure." He paused. "Then your total loss exposure in this package is wrong. Too high." The junior analyst, a young woman whose name tag read Simone, pulled her laptop closer without being told. Her fingers moved. The room breathed around the sound of keystrokes. Theo stood back and waited and thought about the call he had missed from his daughter's school the previous afternoon, about the fact that Maisie had a science fair presentation on Thursday and had asked him twice to help her with the label for her trifold board, and about whether the granola bar in his pocket counted as breakfast or whether he should try to find something else before his shift ended at 7. He thought about all of this because thinking about it kept his hands from shaking in a room where shaking hands would have told everyone something he didn't want them to know. Simone stopped typing. Her expression changed before her voice did. Just slightly. Just the small involuntary tightening around the eyes that happens when a number doesn't do what you expected it to do. "The subsidiary recovery posted in April," she said. "It's in the Q1 supplemental." She typed again. "It was never consolidated into the main model." Philip turned toward her. "That's a reconciliation gap, not a valuation error. It changes the impairment reversal by." She stopped. She typed more. $31 million. Nobody moved immediately. The frost outside was still sitting on the edges of every window, and the city below was turning from gray to the particular pale gold that Edmonton does in October, just before it decides to commit to winter. And inside the boardroom of Merit and Hale Financial Group, nobody was talking about the creditor call anymore. "Recalculate the covenant position," Catherine said, voice quiet in the way that control sounds quiet when it has found its footing again. Simone was already doing it, the breach threshold. Another analyst said from the far end of the table, younger voice carefully neutral. "If impairment reverses, the leverage ratio moves." "By how much?" Philip said, and it was not quite a question. Simone looked up from her screen. "Enough that the breach doesn't trigger." Philip stood. "One recovery posting doesn't resolve liquidity pressure." "We still have stop," Catherine said. It was one word, and it landed with a kind of weight that had nothing to do with volume. She looked at the restructuring package in front of her for a long moment. Then slowly, without drama, she moved the pen to the table and left it there. We verify every number in this package before anyone makes a call. She looked at Simone. Start over from the subsidiary schedules. Work forward. Philip's jaw tightened. The creditors are expecting. Then they can wait, Catherine said, while we make sure we're not handing them a company that doesn't actually need to be handed over. She looked at Theo. How did you know to look at the Vancouver disposition? Theo hesitated. The question was fair, and the answer was complicated in the particular way that truths are complicated when they require more context than the room has time for. The number didn't sit right, he said. Impairment that high on a Western Division portfolio in a quarter where I knew the Vancouver lease disposition had completed. It didn't match. You knew about the Vancouver disposition? I saw the termination notice. It came through facilities for the equipment removal coordination. Catherine studied him for a long moment. Not the way people study someone they are about to dismiss, the way people study something they are trying to correctly understand. You stay, she said. Ma'am, your shift just changed. Sit down somewhere and don't leave this floor. Theo sat in the chair nearest the wall that no one was using, the one that wasn't really part of the table, the observer's chair. He folded his maintenance gloves and held them on his knee and watched Simone and the other analyst open spreadsheet after spreadsheet while the daylight came up over the river valley and gradually filled the room. Philip stopped contributing and started watching. That shift happened slowly enough that it might not have been visible to someone who wasn't paying attention, but Theo was paying attention. The way people who have spent years being invisible learn to pay attention to rooms that don't know they're being read. Something in Philip's stillness had changed. Not the way stillness changes when someone is simply frustrated. The way it changes when someone is calculating. Every 30 minutes or so, another analyst called out a figure that didn't reconcile. Not errors in the chaotic sense, errors in the particular, recurring sense that starts to look less like mistake and more like pattern. A deferred vendor payment carried twice. A government grant receivable excluded from cash flow summary. A depreciation schedule on the Ontario portfolio using assumptions that hadn't been updated since a refinancing that happened 18 months ago. None of them alone changed the picture entirely. Together they moved the picture enough that bankruptcy began to look less like the conclusion of a story and more like a door that someone had been trying very hard to get Catherine to walk through. By 8:30, the air in the room had changed. Philip knew it. Theo could see that he knew it, the same way you can see someone recalculate their position when the ground shifts under them. Then Simone said quietly, "There's a manual override in the debt covenant formula." The room went still in a different way. "What kind of override?" Catherine said. The threshold reference was changed from the consolidated figure to a divisional subset. It makes the breach look worse than it is on the consolidated basis. Simone scrolled. The original formula was correct. Someone replaced the cell reference with a hard-coded value. When? Catherine said. Simone checked the metadata. 3 weeks ago, 11:47 p.m., whose login? Simone looked up from the screen. She didn't say Philip's name. She didn't need to. The way she looked at the screen and then at Catherine said enough. Philip unfolded his arms. Quarter-end adjustments happen at all hours. That's standard practice during covenant review preparation. You replaced a dynamic formula with a hard value, Catherine said. That's not an adjustment. That's a decision. It was a temporary measure to stabilize the model during stress testing. Theo had been watching the screen from his chair by the wall, and something caught his eye the same way the first number had. Not the value itself, but the pattern surrounding it. He stood up without thinking and moved toward Simone's screen. The linked schedule, he said quietly. The one that feeds the liquidity summary. Simone looked at where he was pointing. She clicked. Another formula reference, also hard-coded. Also with an original that was different. Also 3 weeks ago, she said. Also 11:47, Theo said. The room understood what that meant, the same session, the same hour. Decisions made in the middle of the night that moved numbers in one direction, the direction that made dissolution look necessary. Philip stood. This is circumstantial interpretation of routine modeling decisions, and I am not going to sit here while a facilities employee without any standing in this room. Sit down, Philip, Catherine said. I won't. Sit down. He sat down. Not because the instruction carried authority, but because sitting down was still better than the alternative, and Philip was someone who always identified the better option even when he didn't like it. Catherine looked at Theo. Is there more? Theo went back to the chair by the wall and thought about it the way he thought about things that mattered, carefully and without rushing. The Ontario depreciation assumptions, he said after a moment, the outdated ones. If they were updated to match current after the refinancing, the assets base changes, it might affect your secured position. Simone checked. She checked twice. Then she said, in a voice that had gone very careful, secured leverage improves by 9%. 9% doesn't solve a liquidity crisis, Philip said. No, Catherine said, not looking at him. But it proves someone wanted us to look weaker than we are. The silence that followed that sentence was the kind that lands in a room and stays. By 9 o'clock, 2 lawyers had arrived. Rebecca Ng, Merritt and Hale's senior legal counsel, was first, with the particular expression of someone who has been called into a situation that is worse than it was described over the phone, but not quite as bad as the worst case she allowed herself to imagine on the drive over. She read what Simone showed her without speaking for 4 minutes. Then she said, "I'm going to need to make some calls." Catherine said, "Make them." Rebecca left the room. A board member who had arrived sometime after 7:30 and had been sitting at the far end of the table reading on his tablet without interjecting looked up for the first time. Who found the first discrepancy? Catherine indicated Theo with a slight tilt of her head. He was back in the chair by the wall. The board member looked at Theo for a long moment, the way people look at something that has disrupted the category they use to organize the world, and said, "In what capacity?" "Night maintenance," Theo said. The board member looked at his tablet and then back at Theo. Then he looked at Catherine. He didn't say anything, but the look said enough. It said that this day was going to require a larger category than the one he'd arrived with. Theo glanced at the clock above the door. 8:52. He thought about Maisie. On days he worked the early shift, she went to school with the Okafor kids from down the street, which meant she left the apartment at 7:40, and he was supposed to be back by 3:15 when the bus dropped her off. On days when something changed the plan, she waited in the school's aftercare with her backpack on her knees and her book open on the table and her eyes checking the door every few minutes in the patient, practiced way that children learn when they've had to learn it. He had promised her Thursday. He had promised to help with the trifold board by Thursday. Catherine noticed him look at the clock. "Do you need to be somewhere?" "My daughter's school," he said. "She gets out at 3:15. Philip made a sound. Catherine looked at her assistant through the glass wall and motioned her inside. "Call West Grove Elementary. Tell them Maisie Barker may be picked up late today and to keep her in aftercare until further notice covered by Merritt and Hale." Theo looked at her. "You don't need to do that." "I know," she said. "I'm doing it anyway." She looked at her assistant. "And call the cafeteria. Have breakfast sent up." Her assistant nodded and left. Philip said, "We are not running a daycare service during a corporate restructuring." Catherine answered without looking at him, "We are correcting our priorities." She turned back to the screens. "Keep going." By 10 o'clock, Rebecca had returned with 2 additional lawyers and a document that she placed in front of Catherine without preamble. "There are external transfers," she said, "through a numbered consulting firm. 19 months of payments. No deliverables attached to any of them." Catherine read the first page, total $7.4 million for what? The description on each invoice says strategic advisory. But the firm was incorporated 14 months ago and has no verifiable client history outside these payments. Theo, across the room, was watching Philip the way you watch something that you already understand is about to move. He had watched Philip's stillness all morning, and he had seen it change in the incremental, calculated way that stillness changes when a person is running the odds on options that are disappearing one by one. "The incorporation date," Theo said quietly, not to anyone in particular. "Does it precede the first modeling override?" Rebecca checked. Then she looked up. "By 2 weeks." Catherine turned toward Philip. The whole room had gone very still. Philip stood up slowly, with the controlled, deliberate movement of someone who has decided that composure is the last asset he has left worth protecting. "I'm going to need to speak with counsel." "Sit down," Catherine said. "I have the right." "You have the right to counsel." "Yes, you'll have that opportunity." She held his gaze. "After you answer one question." Philip said nothing. "Who is the beneficial owner of the consulting firm?" Philip said nothing. "Who were you moving money to?" "You'd be making a significant allegation," Philip said. "I'm reading a document," Catherine said. "The allegation is in the document. I'm just asking you to explain it." Philip looked around the room the way people look around a room when they are performing the act of evaluating options, but have already understood that the options are gone. His eyes went to Theo for a moment, brief and involuntary, and what was in that look was not quite what Theo expected. It was not contempt, not the version of contempt that Philip had been using all morning. It was something rawer than that. Something closer to the anger of someone who has been undone by a variable they didn't account for. "I would like to speak with my counsel," Philip said carefully. 2 officers are outside the door, Catherine said. They'll take you to conference room B. No device access, no external calls until legal has completed its review. Philip walked to the door with the careful posture of a man who has decided that dignity is a performance he can still give even when everything else has been taken. The door closed behind him. The room exhaled. Simone looked at her screen. The other analyst looked at his. The board member at the end of the table set his tablet down. Rebecca began making notes on a yellow pad with the focused efficiency of someone who has been waiting for the situation to clarify before beginning. Catherine sat down for the first time all morning. She looked at the restructuring package on the table in front of her, at the signature page she had not signed, at the pen she had set down and not picked up again. She looked at it for a long moment, then she closed the folder. She looked at Theo. "Tell me the truth," she said. "Who are you?" Theo held his maintenance gloves on his knee. "Theo Barker, night maintenance lead, level 3. "That's who you are here," she said. "Who were you before here?" He looked at the window. Outside, the frost had burned off the glass, and the river valley below was in full autumn color, birch and poplar, doing what they do in October, going gold before they let go. "I did 2 years of an MBA at the University of Alberta," he said. "Financial modeling concentration. I left before I finished. Why, my wife got sick. We had a 4-year-old. Nobody in the room said anything. I took contract work to cover the hospital bills. Data entry first, then some contract modeling work for a logistics company in Calgary. Remote work, mostly." He looked at his hands. "She didn't make it. After she passed, I needed hours that let me be there when Maisie got home from school, night shift. You're home by 7:30. The bus comes at 3:15. It works." The youngest analyst, the one at the far end who had been quiet all morning, had stopped pretending to look at his screen. "You never went back," Catherine said. "There wasn't a version of going back that kept the rest of it intact," Theo said, "and the rest of it mattered more." The room held that sentence for a moment without rushing past it. Rebecca looked up from her yellow pad. "The original model," she said. "Before the override. Was it sound?" Simone checked. "The base model is solid. The covenant formulas before the manual changes were accurate. The error isn't in the original work. So the company's actual position," the board member said. "Difficult," Rebecca said, "but not terminal. Not if the overrides are reversed and the impairment corrections are applied. Not if leadership changes," Simone said, and then looked briefly alarmed at herself for having said it aloud in this room. "No," Catherine said, not unkindly. "That's right." She looked at the board member. He nodded once. By noon, the creditor call had been rescheduled. Rebecca had transmitted a package to the firm's external legal team. 2 board members had called in to an emergency governance session that lasted 45 minutes and produced a resolution suspending Philip Strand's authority pending formal investigation. Theo sat through all of it in the chair by the wall, quiet and present, eating the breakfast that the cafeteria had sent up, eggs and toast and orange juice that was better than anything he'd had time to make at 4 in the morning, and answering questions when Catherine or Rebecca or Simone directed them at him, which they did with increasing frequency as the morning went on, with decreasing self-consciousness about the fact that the person they were asking was in a maintenance uniform and had started the morning with a mop. At 1 o'clock, Catherine asked Simone to step out, and she asked the other analysts to take a break, and she asked Rebecca to give her 15 minutes, and then it was just Catherine and Theo in the boardroom, and the city outside the window and the unsigned restructuring package in the closed folder on the table. She pushed a folder across the table toward him. He opened it. Inside was a letter on Merit and Hale letterhead. The position was listed as Senior Financial Systems Analyst. The salary was listed on the second line. Theo read it once. Then he set it on the table and looked at it without picking it up. "I can't do the hours," he said. "I need to be at the school by 3:15. "I know," Catherine said. "Read the terms," he read again. "Flexible scheduling, school pickup hours protected, remote work 2 days per week minimum. My daughter gets sick sometimes," he said. "She's 7. Strep throat and ear infections and the occasional mystery fever." "Then you go home," Catherine said. "I can't be reachable at 2 in the morning. "You're not being asked to be." He looked at her. He was looking for the version of this offer that would disappear when the gratitude faded and the Monday morning reality of having a non-traditional employee set in. He had seen that version before in the logistics company in Calgary, in the contract work that paid well until the situation normalized and then quietly stopped calling. "This isn't charity," Catherine said, and she said it the way people say things that they have thought through before saying. "I'm not offering you this because I feel like I owe you something. I'm offering you this because I spent this morning watching you read a room that has been full of credentialed professionals for 11 years, and you were the only one who read it correctly." Theo said nothing. The model needs rebuilding, she said. The systems that Philip managed need to be audited from the ground up. I need someone who can look at a number and know when it's wrong. She paused. You already do that. You've been doing it in a maintenance uniform for 4 years. I don't have the MBA, he said. The MBA was going to certify something you already had, she said. I'm more interested in the thing itself. He looked at the letter again. He thought about Maisie and the trifold board and the school call he had missed and the granola bar she had packed for him at 4:30 in the morning because she was 7 years old. And she knew he didn't eat enough before his shift, and she worried about him in the careful, quiet way that children worry about parents when they have learned that worry is sometimes the only help they can offer. He thought about what it had cost him to walk through that boardroom door that morning. Not the risk of the job he could afford to lose barely, but he could afford it. The other cost. The cost of being visible in a room where visibility was not offered to people like him. The cost of saying the true thing out loud, when the true thing required standing in front of people with better suits and longer titles and the particular kind of confidence that comes from never having had to learn invisibility. If I accept, he said, I have 3 conditions. Catherine looked at him without expression, which he was beginning to understand was how she looked when she was listening most carefully. The overnight janitorial team, he said. 4 of them have been requesting schedule stability for 2 years. It affects their childcare. If the firm is rebuilding, that gets addressed first. Catherine said, done, benefits review for the support staff. Dental coverage was cut 18 months ago. Done. And no announcement about what happened this morning, he said. I don't want a story. I don't want to be the janitor who saved the company. I want to be the analyst who does good work. Catherine was quiet for a moment. I can protect the internal details, she said. I can't promise the building won't talk. Buildings always talk, he said. I'm not asking you to stop it. I'm asking you not to start it. She nodded once. Done. Theo picked up the letter. He folded it once and put it in the same pocket where the granola bar had been. I need to finish my shift, he said. The 14th floor east hallway isn't done. Catherine smiled for the first time that day, something small and real that had nothing performed about it. Go finish your shift. He stood, collected his maintenance gloves from the table, and walked to the door. Then he stopped. The trifold board, he said, not turning around. My daughter's science fair is Thursday. I need Wednesday evening. Take it, Catherine said. He nodded and opened the door and went back to the hallway where his cart was waiting exactly where he'd left it, one wheel still turned slightly to the left from when he'd abandoned it to walk into a room that had no framework for him and had needed him anyway. He finished the east hallway. He did the supply room. He did the elevator banks and the stairwell landing and the glass panel beside the fire exit that always picked up fingerprints by Tuesday. He clocked out at 7:12. On the bus home, the city had gone fully gold outside the windows, October committing to itself the way it always did eventually, and Theo sat with his hands in his lap and the folded letter in his pocket and thought about what he would tell Maisie, which was nothing. For now, because 7-year-olds needed breakfast and school and Wednesday's trifold board, before they needed to know about the things their fathers walked into before the sun came up. When he got to the apartment, she was already at the kitchen table with her cereal finished and her backpack on and her coat half zipped because she always forgot the bottom 2 centimeters. She looked up. You're late, she said. Big morning at work, he said. She studied him the way children study their parents when they're deciding whether to ask the question or let it go. Then she decided to let it go the way she so often did, gracious and patient in ways she shouldn't have had to learn yet. Did you eat the granola bar? She said. I ate it, he said. And eggs. And toast. She seemed satisfied by this. She picked up her backpack and headed for the door. He caught the bottom of her coat zipper and finished it for her. Because that was the thing about being there at 3:15 and 7 in the morning. You caught the small things. You were present for the bottom 2 centimeters. Wednesday, he said. We'll do the labels for your board. I'll be home by 4. She turned and looked at him with the particular expression she had when something mattered more than she wanted to let on. You promise? I promise, he said. She went out the door ahead of him and down the stairs into the October morning, into the gold and the cold and the ordinary irreplaceable day, and he followed her, one hand steadying the railing, the other still holding his maintenance gloves. 44 floors above the street, in a boardroom where the frost had long since burned off the glass and the light was coming in clean, and even across a table that no longer held a restructuring package, Catherine Merritt stood at the window for the first time since before dawn, watching the city the way people watch something they have come very close to losing and have not lost yet. She thought about the number that had stopped a janitor in a hallway at 5 in the morning. She thought about what it meant that the number had been there all along, in plain sight, and the only person who had seen it was the one person in the building that everyone else had trained themselves not to see. She thought about her father and what he had built, and what she had nearly signed away. And then she stopped thinking about it, because there was too much work ahead to spend more time on what hadn't happened. She picked up her pen and got back to it.